on Business Incorporated today. United Nations World Tourism Organization partners African Air Association. Zimbabwe foreign currency deposits up 55.53% in August. South Africa's power utility company signs agreement with XR. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Ini John McCowell. We'll start with the markets as usual. We'll kick off this week's edition with market numbers on the African continent, where major equities were trading mostly in positive territory as intraday. Nigeria's main index was up marginally, though, 0.05%, while South Africa's GSE index traded flat at intraday. On the flip side, Egypt's EJX30 was down 0.39%. Meanwhile, the Nairobi Stock Exchange closed Friday's session in the green. Over to the Middle East now. Major indexes were trading mixed at intraday. The Abu Dhabi main index fell 0.45%, while Dubai's index also declined by 0.67%. Elsewhere in the region, Saudi Arabia and the Qatari exchanges recorded gains. Both indexes were up 0.36% and 0.11% each at intraday. Let's move to Europe now, where stocks were muted as investors continued to monitor corporate earnings, COVID-19 and inflation picture. Well, we'll have details of that with Conrad joining us from Frankfurt. Hello, Conrad. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon from Frankfurt. Hello, Nigeria.
Hello to you from Frankfurt. So the week on markets has started with disappointing economic data. Germany's leading index of business climate has fallen for the fourth month in a row. What's behind this pessimism?
You know, business leaders here in the country are convinced that the COVID-19 situation will not get better over the winter months, but on the contrary, it's likely that it will get worse. The numbers of COVID cases here in Germany and all over Europe are on the rise. It's very likely that the authorities will come up with new restrictions, as unpopular as they might be, and this is, of course, having a negative effect on business. What's more, the situation in China, remember our German economy in particular is very connected with China, and China's zero COVID policy means that as soon as a case comes up somewhere in China, a factory is closed down. And this means for businesses here in Germany that the supply chains are getting disrupted again, that you cannot operate if you are a factory here in Germany, and that, of course, is dampening the outlook that we are going to see a strong recovery of the economy, or it's putting the perspective of this, postponing this perspective of a recovery further into the future. And this is having such a negative effect on business sentiment here.
And the bank, HSBC, has come out with an earnings report, and there's more going on in Europe's banking sector. Tell us more about these earnings reports.
Yes, the earnings report of HSBC has gone down well with investors. Just like other large banks, HSBC has managed to, profit from an economic recovery over the summer. And also it has managed to reduce the risk provisions for potentially defaulting loans. Now, later this week, Deutsche Bank here in Germany will come up with its earnings. Of course, people are now wondering what those numbers will look like. The dominating story on Europe's financial markets today, this Monday, is happening in Italy, where the talks about a rescue of Monte dei Paschi di Siena, often called the world's oldest bank, by the large bank UniCredit, have failed because the government in Rome refused to refinance Monte dei Paschi with more than 6 billion euros more. That's what UniCredit had demanded, which means now that as the talks are off, the rescue of the bank Monte dei Paschi is off, which is really a problem because the European authorities have given the government in Rome and the banks involved only until the end of this year to find a solution. So a bankruptcy of Monte dei Paschi has become more probable today.
And BioNTech, one of the large COVID vaccine makers based in Germany, has recorded a 15% increase in its share price since the beginning of the month. Do we know what drove this?
Yes, BioNTech, together with its partner Pfizer, is looking forward to getting the permission to have its vaccine used in the United States with children between 5 and 11 years. That's, of course, the outlook of a huge profit in the US. But you know, there's more. Also here in Europe, many parents are looking eagerly forward to have the possibility to have their kids vaccinated. In particular, in schools, it's very difficult to prevent the virus from spreading, as kids don't like wearing masks. They don't like to keep a distance. So a vaccination against COVID is really the cleverest way to go. That is the perspective for the vaccine makers, for all of them, of course, but also in particular BioNTech, which is very popular here in Germany as it's based in Germany. So the outlook of a huge profit is what's driving the share price here.
All right, and we wish them the best. Thank you so much, Conrad, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
So moving on now, shares in Asia Pacific were mixed in early trading today as investors reacted to the release of HSBC earnings, which we just talked about, was up about 70%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index slipped about 0.1% as of its final hour of trading. Hong Kong listed shares of HSBC rose 0.43% after the bank on Monday reported a pre-tax profit in the third quarter of 2021. Bested expectations. Well, shares of embattled developer China Evergrande Group were flat after surging nearly 6% earlier. The firm announced on Sunday that it had resumed work on more than 10 projects. Mainland Chinese stocks closed higher, with the Shanghai Composite gaining 0.76%, while the Shenzhen Component advanced 0.72%. Japan's Nikkei 225 closed 0.71% lower, while the Topix Index shed 0.34%. South Korea's Kospi gained 0.48% to close at over 3,000.54. Stocks in Australia edged higher, with S&P AX 200 rising 0.34%. In the U.S., stock futures edged higher in early morning trading after the Dow Jones Industrial Average notched its third positive week in a row at a record high. Dow futures rose 18 points. S&P 500 futures and Nasdaq 100 futures traded in the mildly positive territory. Wall Street is coming off a winning week on the back of strong corporate earnings. The blue chip Dow gained more than 1% last week and closed Friday at a record high. The S&P 500 rallied 1.7% last week, also posting its third straight positive week and hitting an all-time high on Friday. All major averages have registered solid gains for October. The Dow and the S&P 500 are both up more than 5%, while the Nasdaq Composite has climbed 4.4% month to date. Let's see what's happening in South Africa as the power utility Eskom has signed an agreement with its major coal suppliers, Exxaro and Seriti Resources, that will see them develop renewable energy projects at their operations, and that's in an effort to achieve the utility's net zero emission status by 2050. The power utility and the two coal mining companies released it during the signing of a memorandum of understanding that would create employment and reskilling opportunities for communities living and working at and around their operations, and take a step towards not just transition to, but also low carbon future. Meanwhile, Eskom has announced that it will be implementing stage 2 load shedding as from today, this evening, as the national power grid is under severe pressure following breakdowns at some of its electricity generating plants over the weekend. Now we have a correspondent there, Brian Pugani, joining us to tell us what's going on with the power situation and, of course, this agreement that's just been signed. Hello, Brian. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Great. And you?
I'm well, thank you.
So, you know, the issue of transitioning when it comes to power, moving to cleaner energy has been on in South Africa for a while. And the price of coal and power and fuel has also interrupted that. So with this signing now, what do you have the details? What does it mean?
Well, at the moment, Eskom, Exxaro, and Seriti have not put out the full details. It's a step in the right direction because we've been talking about clean energy in South Africa for the past, I think, since the year began. Because Eskom and the country as a whole are trying to move away from coal-powered energy, which has South Africa having one of the highest carbon dioxide emissions in the continent. So Eskom has been trying to move away from coal-powered energy to renewable, cleaner energy. So this is a step in the right direction with two of the biggest mining companies in the country agreeing to saying we're going to work with Eskom. We are willing to have plants which will have renewable energy in the country, which will help as well moving from coal to cleaner energy. But at the moment, we don't have the full details since it's just a memorandum of understanding. They have not released the full details to tell us when exactly is it going to start and how is it going to operate.
All right, we're talking about the load shedding with the second stage, which starts today. Let's assess the first stage, how it went, how much power did an average South African get, and what does this second stage hold? What was the outlook for it?
Well, with load shedding, it actually started over the weekend on Friday evening. Then they suspended it on Sunday morning. They normally take our power for 2 hours in other areas. Though some of the power stations were off, we've had reports of people not having electricity for the past 28 hours, and they've been complaining on social media saying, what's the ETA on the power coming back, whether is it load shedding or is it the power stations which are affected. So at the moment, tonight, we're going to go back to stage 2 of load shedding, which will be taking place from 9, I think they said, up to tomorrow or Wednesday, which will be at 2-hour intervals depending on the areas. In suburban areas, it's 2 hours. In other industrial areas, it could be 4. So there's no really clear indication of how the load shedding is going to be and for how long, because we're seeing in other areas, like I said, that power has been off for almost a day now. And Eskom and City Power, which is one which runs Johannesburg, are mum at the moment to say they are still working on it. Technicians are at site. So we're just waiting to see when that kicks in tonight and tomorrow. We'll see how that goes.
So what does this mean for businesses, and what are the alternatives that businesses are embracing?
Well, it's a major step back for businesses. It's really not good for businesses. We know that once there's no electricity, most companies cannot, production stops. We've had companies saying they've lost millions of rands in the past month only because once we get into the rainy season, we always have these issues with Eskom saying their power stations are off, the coal is wet. So it really affects businesses and it affects the economy recovering because we've been under lockdowns, different lockdowns due to COVID. Now Eskom is also taking the economy backwards with all these power cuts. So it's really not a good thing for business in South Africa at the moment with this load shedding and power cuts, plus the recovering economy due to COVID-19. So businesses do have generators, there's some which do have, but the smaller businesses are really going to struggle because they don't have that capacity to have their own generators to have power and continue production. For the bigger companies, it's slightly better, but it's added costs to run those generators.
This one, of course, that cost will be passed on to the consumers. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for bringing us up to date on the past situation in South Africa. Enjoy the rest of the day. All right, so we'll take a break now. When we come back, we have other conversations from the African continent. To stay with us is Business Incorporated on Channels Television. You're welcome back. You're still watching Business Incorporated on Channels Television. We go over to Kenya now. The Treasury has agreed to inject cash into Kenya Power and Kenya Airways in the financial year starting July 2022. citing the role of the two struggling firms in supporting economic recovery from COVID-19. No bailouts was allotted to the two firms in the current financial year, raising concerns about their worsening cash flow positions that could hurt operations and slow down recovery in the economic activity. Well, Kenya Power and Kenya Airways are two key fueling economic growth, and they also contribute to the creation of employment. And analysts believe they should be supported through cash injections in the budget. Now, what does this mean? What does it say about the Kenyan economy and the fiscal pressure in the country? We have Matt Kindiga, Associate Practice Lead for Sub-Saharan Africa at Front of You, joining us to share his thoughts on that. Hello, Matt. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the program today.
Yeah. So what are these bailouts to the airways and the power sector? What does it tell us about the state of the public finances in Kenya?
So certainly it is concerning because it suggests that the government has much greater fiscal liabilities than we previously assumed. So Kenya's fiscal position was already quite tight. It was one of the countries that we were most concerned about. If we look at the fiscal positions of governments across Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana is a country that we are monitoring very closely, but also Kenya. So certainly it suggests that there is less fiscal room that the government has in terms of maneuverability to support the economy. It also suggests that the government will be under greater pressure to cut spending, raise taxes, so introduce austerity measures. And this goes against the government's official plans of raising recurrent expenditure by close to 50% year on year through the next financial year. So in reality, we expect the government to achieve probably high single digits increase in real terms expenditure over the next year or so. But certainly we would expect infrastructure projects to suffer quite significantly as a result of this. The government has very little choice but to provide bailout funding to both Kenya Power and Kenya Airways. So we would expect these to be prioritized over other discretionary expenditure and infrastructure investment.
And to what extent will fiscal pressures affect the country's economic outlook?
So certainly fiscal pressures, weak public finances are a significant risk for Kenya's economic outlook, together with the very weak domestic and global tourism industry. Those are the two main risks to the growth outlook for Kenya. And in our view, it will curtail or fiscal risks, weak fiscal positions will curtail growth in Kenya. But I would emphasize that the private sector in Kenya has been surprisingly resilient. We saw a rebound in activity begin already in Q3 2020. And the private sector has benefited from a range of positive drivers. For example, very strong credit growth from commercial banks throughout the pandemic. We've also seen very strong export-orientated demand because of the rise in global commodity prices. So our view is that although public finances do raise or are a risk for the growth outlook and will curtail economic growth to an extent, we don't think they represent a fundamental risk to Kenya's otherwise upbeat outlook.
And how will business sentiment be affected by austerity measures over the coming year?
So certainly there is rising anxiety in the private sector. The companies that we advise, big multinational companies, they have increasingly expressed concern over higher taxes that they will face. So the government already raised the value-added tax rate back to its pre-pandemic levels as early as January. We would expect new taxes to be introduced, but it really does depend on the industry. So companies selling products that are considered discretionary or luxury products are probably likely to be more affected. We could also see a bit of a slowdown in the construction industry, which could affect sentiment, because if the government is prioritizing bailing out Kenya Airways, Kenya Power, infrastructure investment will suffer. So there could be a bit of a negative repercussion for infrastructure investment and the construction industry overall. So certainly some anxiety, although as I mentioned a bit earlier, most companies in the private sector are relatively confident about the future. So it's not their biggest concern at the moment.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for giving us some details and updates on Kenya's situation. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thank you very much.
So moving on now, let's go to Zimbabwe, where foreign currency deposit on a broad money basis registered growth of 55.53% in the year to August 2021. The foreign currency deposit increased from 86.01 billion Zimbabwe dollars in August 2020 to $133.77 billion in August this year. The growth in FCA deposits was largely driven by revaluation changes owing to the movement of the exchange rate from 83.40 per $1 US in August 2020 to 86.06 per $1 US in August 2021. Now, contrary to annual growth, FCA deposits were down month on month in the period under review after they declined by 5.24% from $141.17 billion in July to $133.77 billion in August. Meanwhile, broad money declined from $330.66 billion recorded in July 2021 to $326.19 billion in August. And the United Nations World Tourism Organization has signed a memorandum of understanding with the African Airlines Association to strengthen the relationship between the aviation and tourism sectors in Africa. Under the terms of agreement, both parties will consult each other on matters and activities of mutual interest to develop greater connectivity and advance seamless travel across Africa. The two parties will also work together to encourage greater cooperation and dialogue between the transportation and tourism sectors within the continent. Let's go to the oil space now. Oil prices rose in early trade today, extending pre-weekend gains with U.S. crude hitting a 7-year high as global supply remained tight amid strong demand worldwide as economies recover from coronavirus pandemic-induced slumps. Brent crude futures climbed 0.75% to $86.17 a barrel, following on from last Friday's 1.1% gain. The contract was near a 3-year high of $86.10, which it hit last week Thursday. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures 0.8% to $84.42 a barrel, after climbing 1.5% on Friday, its highest since August 2019. Oil prices have been bolstered by worries about coal and gas shortages in China, India, and Europe, which spurred fuel switching to diesel and fuel oil for power. Meanwhile, U.S. energy firms last week cut oil and natural gas rigs for the first time in 7 weeks, even as oil prices rose. In the metals market now, gold prices held steady early today after cutting gains in the prior session following the Federal Reserve's comment that inflation could ease next year, and the central bank was on track to start tapering its stimulus. Spot gold was a little change, while U.S. gold futures fell 0.1%. The metal rallied to its highest since early September on Friday before trimming gains on Federal Chairman Jerome Powell's comment on tapering. Meanwhile, spot silver was flat. Platinum rose 0.1%, while palladium gained 0.7%. Well, that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Ini John Mekwa.